7 o'clock, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Invite everyone to please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Where is our flag? All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kathy, would you call the roll, please?
Jim Donovan.
Here.
Steve Nelson.
Here.
James Schuyler.
Here.
Julian Davis.
Here.
Jeff Jacobson.
Here.
Jeff Jones.
Present.
Kristen Rand.
Here.
Quorum's present.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda as proposed? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as proposed?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Davy.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Rand.
Yes.
Schuyler.
Yes.
Donovan.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Audience to visitors. Is there anyone in the audience this evening who would like to address the board? Ask you to come down to the microphone. Please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes. Go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is Lee Zucker. I work at the high school in the special ed department. I've come and spoken a few times before. I know that we usually use this time to kind of voice our frustrations or concerns. I wanted to use this time a little bit differently though. As far as I know, our district doesn't really have any way to publicly thank our staff who are going above and beyond. So I just wanted to take a minute and thank 2 groups of people. So, sorry, I don't know why I always get nervous. We stand in front of people all day. The first one is Christian Thurwinger and Marion Nealing. They work with me in the ABLE program. And we've had very limited resources this year just because of COVID, not like budgets or just trying to figure out, we can't cook, we can't take field trips, we can't have them do jobs. And their innovation and flexibility with that program has just gone like above and beyond. They have the kids using saws and sanding things down, drilling them together. They're making bookcases for our classroom. They're just doing things that I didn't think that we could do, and I didn't even know how much they were doing until I found out today, actually. So I work with them, and I didn't know how exceptional this was. So I wanted to give them a little shout out, and I also wanted to give a little shout out to our paraprofessionals. We are very short on staff, as we know, we've talked about it before, but they are working harder than ever, and they're so flexible. I think their schedules have changed like 20 times in the last month, and basically they're just exceptional human beings. So I just wanted to let our community know how wonderful and how hard our staff are working to do. There's a million more, but I'll just stop with those 2. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Trax, and I live at 1812 Joseph Sixbury. I have a 3rd grade daughter who goes to North Grove Elementary School, and I'm going to start by saying at the beginning of the school year, I toured a private school because they're back full-time 5 days a week, and it was a consideration. I came home, I talked to my daughter, and she said, "Mom, you can't take me from my school, my teachers, my friends." So we stuck it out, okay? So you've made the first step at getting these students back to in-person learning, but you cannot stop there. Let's increase the length of the school day back to the regular hours. Let's get them back in school 5 days a week. I myself, I work in an elementary school, not far from here in a different district. I have close to 850 students in my elementary school, in my building, and our students are back full day. 4 days a week, they are full day. It can be done. You cannot continue to deny these students what they need for their academics, their social, and their emotional needs. My superintendent in my district sent out an email just last week that by March 15th, 80 to 85% of my staff will be vaccinated. And then he said after that, look for an increase in in-person days. What's Sycamore's plan? A comment was made at the board meeting last time. that in order to go 5 days a week, a child vaccine would be needed for in-person learning to be 5 days. Let's get real. That's a long ways away, and my child will not be anywhere near that line. You cannot continue to deny our kids in this community from their education. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, if you want to refrain from any applause or any sentimental support or detraction from people who speak, appreciate that. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Stout. I just have some quick things. I have 2 kids that have IEPs, and I have seen them, because of online learning and not being in school full time, they have lost a lot. My one child is special needs, and he needs to be in school full time. I defer the rest of my time to Joanne.
Good evening, my name is Joanne Demeen. I live on Brower Place in Reston Pond subdivision, Sycamore. My 8-year-old daughter is a 2nd grader at Southeast Elementary. Last Tuesday morning at approximately 3:30 a.m., I was wakened by the sounds of my daughter sobbing coming from her bedroom located on the other side of our home. I walked in to see her sitting on the bedroom floor, rocking back and forth. Her bed was made as if she hadn't gone to sleep at all. When I inquired why she was so upset, she replied that everyone is gone, citing a recently deceased father, the absence of any grandparents, cousins, siblings, her best friend moving last summer. Her emotions were only compounded by the fact that all of her friends from school, whom she enjoys friendships with, were all distanced. My daughter is normally an outgoing, happy-go-lucky kid on most days, but this incident really scared me. She feels alone, isolated, and probably depressed. It's the perfect storm for her to possibly start thinking about doing something to herself, and I'm sure she's not alone in this process. She and her friends are being prohibited from going to school 5 days a week because of a virus with a 98% recovery rate, a virus with a state positivity rate that has dropped exponentially in recent weeks, and for which, thanks to the miracle of modern medicine, we now have 2 widely effective vaccines and a 3rd one coming soon. Is COVID-19 real? Absolutely. Do I personally know someone who's died from this? Yes, I do. However, I know dozens more who have had it, hospitalized for it, and recovered. Most of the aforementioned are emergency responders who report to work every day knowing full well that they will most likely be exposed to it, but don't have the luxury of not going to work if they enjoy paying their bills. Every minute of every day, these kids fall behind in school. Despite their best efforts, teachers have neither the time nor the means to get the job done. I sit beside my daughter during her online school days. I watch her friendly, patient, loving, tenured teacher earnestly try to explain the 8 to 10 items on the agenda each student is expected to complete for the day. She has approximately 15 minutes to complete this while kids pop in and out offline, start texting on the chat lines, become distracted either online or in person, or bombard this poor teacher with an onslaught of questions. Frankly, I don't know how she does that without ingesting a steady supply of Red Bull. It's like watching someone trying to herd cats. And yes, my daughter is also part of that problem before anybody here accuses me of not recognizing that. As you can imagine, all of this takes the finesse of a flying Melinda, trying to balance teaching a class and keeping the attention of all these kids. Perhaps at the middle and high school level, this is not a huge issue, but I can assure you that it is for the elementary grade levels. I sent my daughter to 4 years of preschool so that she'd have a leg up when she began going to school full time. To the best of my knowledge, she was doing well, but her attitude towards school has completely soured now. By keeping kids in this part-time fragmented schedule, you're burning out teachers and disenfranchising students. By this board's own admission, there is no fresh supply of teachers on the horizon to hire if and when our current staff of trained professionals finally throw in the towel and give up. It's a resource we don't have the luxury of losing. I realize that teachers and staff are getting vaccinated. It's a slow process, but once this becomes a reality, I don't understand why we can't get kids back into school 5 days a week. It seems like the goalposts are constantly being repositioned to keep kids out by telling us that we should be following the science, but whose science should we be following? Should we be following a 500-pound governor who consistently lectures us on how to stay healthy during a pandemic? A guy who orders mitigations that he and his family feel entitled to blatantly violate? Should we follow the head of the IDPH, who does not specialize in infectious diseases, but instead is a pediatrician? I believe I can safely say that all of us have had it up to our eyeballs with this situation. I'm sure there's been no walk in the park for any school board around the world. Please stop talking like the school year is over. We have 3 more months to go, and perhaps there is a way that all of us collectively, can stop the hemorrhaging currently happening to our kids' education and preserve the sanity of our teachers by doing whatever it will take to get our kids back into school again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, my name is Kate Organ. I have a third grader at Mr. Wesley's South Prairie. I'm at 964 Bucking Drive. I just want to thank Eric for continuing to be the voice of the parents here, but I'm going to yield my time to Lisa.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Shao. I live at 1156 Freedom Circle here in Sycamore. We've got 4 kids. We have a freshman, a 7th grader, and a 5th grader, and a 2nd grader, so we're at all of the age levels. We just moved here to Sycamore at the beginning of the 2019-2020 school year from Iowa for my husband's job, and we specifically chose Sycamore because of the family friendliness, the community activities, and then primarily because of the schools. Strong education is a huge priority for us. We want our kids to be challenged. We want them to recognize who they are, to connect with their teachers and their classmates to help keep them growing. Our kids have been in 4 schools in 4 different states, and I've taught in 3 of those schools. We have family and friends in numerous states, and I bring that up because it's important to note that in each of these other places, they've spent this entire school year in in-person learning, either full-time learning or hybrid, with activities in full swing as well. When we found out that our schools were not going to be open in person, we gave our kids the option to open enroll to Iowa. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous here. All of the kids turned down the offer. They were okay with waiting a little bit longer. Meanwhile, the private schools and the other districts around us were starting back hybrid or even 5 days a week, so we thought, hey, might be a chance we'd be back in person earlier too, but as we all know, we weren't. And then November came, and we weren't back then either. So let me get to my main point here. I'm here to advocate for our kids to be back in school full time, 5 days a week, and not waiting until the fall to possibly get something planned, but now. I would send my kids back to school full time tomorrow, no question asked. I have full trust in them, and I have full trust in all the other kids and family members as well, because they sacrificed so much already. They want to be in school, they need to be in school. They're not going to do something to sacrifice those chances, and they have, like I said, sacrificed enough already. We spent the year watching the failing rate in our school district increase. We spent the year watching kids completely disengaged from learning. We've even some seem disengaged from life and places. Studies show that the longer they're out of school, the more their anxiety and such increases. And really, who can honestly say that we want our kids on screens even more? We all know the value of in-person learning, the connections, less distractions, the growth that occurs academically and socially. And of course, for how many of our students, school is their only safe place. The American Academy of Pediatrics stated that the evidence shows the academic, mental, and physical benefits of in-person learning outweigh the risk from the coronavirus. It all outweighs the risk. In my mind, it's common sense. Of course it does, because health is about a lot more than the possible spread of this virus. Numerous studies also show that the spread isn't happening in the schools. If there's a spread, it's happening in other settings. The rate of transmission in school settings is low. So I would like to know clearly what our plan in Sycamore is. I would assume there have been numerous committees to put the plans in place, right? We've had almost a year now, and honestly, the things I've heard again and again involve money, number of teachers, and the health department. But specifically looking at the health department, I don't know if we've heard from them at a meeting. I don't remember hearing that. But how do we work with them to get things going? They can't be the obstacle. When we're surrounded by schools, districts, and states that have made it work nationwide with stipulations from their local health departments, I know that we can too. If not, and we keep waiting on this, where does that leave our kids here in Sycamore? Where are our kids left now? It'd be very interesting to see the data comparing our district to those that have been back in person all year, hybrid or full-time. Furthermore, how are we going to get our kids back up to speed and beyond? What's the plan for the kids that have fallen behind, and we know they have? What's the plan for the kids that need more, that need to excel? Continue to wait for the health department? I'm not okay accepting that, and I know I'm not alone. I've talked with family members and friends who teach or in admin in other school districts in other states to see how they've planned and organized everything. They created their plan back in June, and they were able to execute it in August. I don't understand how it's taken us this long to get to hybrid. Happy we're in hybrid, by the way. But nor do I understand how it seems we don't have more in place for full-time face-to-face learning this school year. These obstacles that continue to hold us up seem to have become excuses more than anything when it comes to getting our schools the best learning they can possibly have, and just as important, if not more, the benefits of their emotional and social growth. There shouldn't be obstacles stopping us. As a lot of parents are evaluating what they're going to be doing for their kids next year, us included, I think it's only fair that we do have a solid and clear plan communicated with families ASAP, maybe even tonight. Again, it's time we get our kids back to full-time in-person learning at all grade levels. We really do owe it to them, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to ask you to please refrain from remarks. Thank you.
Hello,
Next.
I'm Amber Frericks. I live at 640 Clover Lane Drive. I'll be yielding my minutes to Dawn Marshall.
Good evening. My name is Dawn Marshall. I reside at 540 Clover Lane Drive in Sycamore. We have 2 children at Southeast Elementary. I'm here on behalf of my children, family, and many other families in the Sycamore School District. I started the District 427 Parents for In-Person Learning Facebook group after having many discussions with like-minded parents. The group has grown to 473 members over this past month. Those of us in attendance tonight are just a small representation of parents of students in the Sycamore School District that desire 5-day in-person learning to be offered as an option to our families. We are very concerned about the district's lack of plan to return to 5-day-a-week in-person learning in the near future. Last school board meeting, Mr. Wilder showed a slide portraying the need for CDC's social distancing guidelines to be loosened or for student vaccinations to occur in order to return to 5-day-a-week in-person learning. The Moderna vaccine is currently approved for ages 18 and over, and the Pfizer vaccine is approved for ages 16 and up. There are currently some studies being done on ages 12 to 18, but enrollment has been low, and no studies have even begun for ages less than 12. Anticipated immunization approval for children is projected to be in at least 2022. Less than 60% of children under the age of 17 get an annual flu shot, which has been widely available for decades. Many families will certainly feel uncomfortable or decline the COVID-19 vaccine for children even when it is approved. Fall 2021 school year marks 18 months from the onset of the pandemic and is still 6 months away. To not be making a plan for in-person learning 5 days a week is completely unacceptable. COVID-19 is not going away, and this is the new normal we must adjust to and move forward. Many of the surrounding school districts, some smaller, similar sized, and larger, have put plans in place to return all elementary and some middle and high schools to 5-day in-person learning already. A few examples are Yorkville, Rockford, St. Charles, Burlington Central, Batavia, Belvedere, Rochelle, Stillman Valley, Byron, Oregon, and Marengo. It's not a complete list. The CDC has stated that schools are an essential part of the infrastructure of communities as they provide safe, supportive learning environments for students, employ teachers and other staff, and enable parents, guardians, and caregivers to go to work. The CDC has issued mitigation strategies that K-12 schools can use to open safely. Students are struggling at all levels with isolation and depression, leading to an increase in the suicide rate. Students are falling behind in academic markers as well. Families with working parents are struggling to accommodate the hybrid and remote scheduling with work schedules and abilities to provide transportation at hours different than normal school operations. Budgetary concerns have been brought up again and again. DeKalb County has one of the highest median property taxes in the United States. It is ranked 55th of the 3,143 counties in order of median property taxes. The state of Illinois is #1 in the nation for highest property tax rate. Many family budgets have been heavily affected from COVID-19 and have required many changes. The same can and should be done for the school district budget. Concerns over potential lawsuit are not reason enough to deny an education to our children. Dentist offices, hotels, other businesses have had people sign waivers to protect them if COVID-19 was contracted there. Moreover, people are still working outside the home, going to the grocery store and other places. Solutions to the need for compliance with safety guidelines must be developed. Simply stating we can't meet the guidelines, so we will not try something new until they are changed is unacceptable. Start brainstorming ways to make it work versus reasons we cannot go back to 5-day in-person learning. Resurvey the district families. Who is interested in remote versus 5-day? Utilize all available space and staff to the fullest advantage. Make part of the gymnasium and field house classroom space. Utilize library space for teaching, auditorium space. Specialist classrooms not currently being used by students. Specialist teachers only doing remote teaching can assist in other areas as needed in the schools. Can more student teachers be utilized from NIU and surrounding colleges to bolster learning? Can we utilize high school students interested in education? How about Oscar staff, currently not working, as the Oscar program is only available to district staff and has downsized? Where can they be utilized? Work with local companies like Upstaging to place plexiglass around desks. We need to start brainstorming and coming up with solutions, not excuses. School administration meet with the health department at regular intervals to develop safe practices that enable in-person school. Develop plans of action for exposure, and do those plans change once the teachers have all been immunized? School administration connect with other districts in person 5 days and see what we can learn from their efforts. Where can we refocus our planning? Remote and in-person teaching. Instead of having teachers spend hours upon hours creating online content, make the content the exact same for remote and in-person by merely streaming the classroom the entire day versus short blocks of instruction. Students in person and live remotely can engage in discussion and ask questions from the teacher. If performed in this way, does that decrease the need for a remote-only teaching position? Allowing and recruiting parent volunteers for room monitors or other needed positions. In conclusion, I would like to define the word perseverance. It means steady persistence in a course of action, a purpose, a state, especially in spite of difficulties, obstacles, or discouragement. We must demand our school district persevere and provide open communication about the plan to return to 5-day in-person learning with the District 427 parents and community.
Thank you.
What is the plan
Thank you.
that our
Next.
kids
Next
back in
speaker.
school?
Next speaker. Next speaker, please. Thank you. Your time has expired. Your time has expired. Let's cut the microphone off. Next.
Good evening, everyone. I've never been to one of these meetings. I don't know what to expect, but I first of all want to say thank you for all being a part of this. I'm sure it's not easy and probably stressful on you too, so thanks for that. I'm probably a little bit different than most of the audience. I'm a former drug discovery scientist from Pfizer. I worked there for 10 years, and I worked on vaccines. And I'm still in the industry. I've been in the industry 22 years, so I work for other biotechs. And me personally, I don't want to take the vaccine, and I would not. I know what kind of work goes into that, and I don't think our children are ready for that. I don't think enough studies have been done. But beyond my personal experience with science, I feel like maybe you need a scientist as part of your board, so I may join your board or run for that. I think it would be good, but really the main reason I'm here is because I'm a mindset expert. About 2 years ago, I got super stressed out with my job, and to the point where mentally I didn't know if I could balance my life. And it's my passion to get people at a great mental state, including adults. I work with many, many people, adults. I'm writing a book for children and teens, hoping to release in 10 days. My girls, a graduate of Sycamore and I have a freshman, are great. No issues. I have one at ISU. She's got all classes in her dorm. She's great. My freshman, mom, I haven't learned anything, and what I've learned, I've taught myself. So luckily I have children who are self-sufficient because they've seen what I've gone through, and I feel like I'm a good example for them. I'm not saying parents aren't good examples, but not every child has a home to go to where it's mentally sound and they have somebody to turn to. And so I think we're not putting enough interest into the mental health of our kids, because if you think about it, I'm going to be 46 next week, and these kids are going to support me and most of us in here when we retire. And if we have kids who aren't educated and motivated and wanting to do things now, what makes you think they're going to want to do that when they get older and then support the economy that we're going to be living in? So not only do we take into consideration all the other things that these parents and women expressed, I think there are a lot more factors to consider that people don't even take into account and different perspectives on the situations. My company is a smaller service biotech company. We sell scientific instrumentation to all the COVID researchers. We came up with a plan immediately to fulfill what we had to do, and we exceeded all goals. Personally, I was the top salesperson. So problem, plan, address, and fix. So I don't know how I can be part of your board, but maybe I can wait after the meeting and see. I would love to help or address things. I know you hear all kinds of stuff from people and maybe you get tired of it, but just because my daughter's going to be graduating in a couple years doesn't mean I don't care about the rest of the kids and the mental health of our community and honestly my retirement and what the world's going to be like, you know, in 20 years. So thank you.
Did we get your name?
Oh, did I not say my name?
I didn't get it.
My name's Heidi Morgan, and I'm a graduate of Burlington Central, and I married my high school sweetheart. And we've been together 32 years.
Hello, everybody. My name's Sherry Highland. I live at 315 Viking Drive. I have two boys that go to North. And I just want to start off telling you a little bit about my boys, because at the end of the day, that's why we're all here, right? My oldest is in 5th grade. He has never struggled academically, but the school environment has been crucial to his social and emotional development. His 3rd grade teacher, the wonderful Mrs. Winters, gave him the most enthusiastic award because when he's interested in something, it's hard to stop him. He loves playing with his friends and jumping on our trampoline. This year I've seen a huge change in my son. To say we've had serious discussions about depression is an understatement. I no longer see the enthusiasm about things he's learning in school. We do our best to provide opportunities for socializing, but these days, the only regular interaction he gets with friends is on video games. Unfortunately, I know we're not alone. My youngest is in 3rd grade. He is the goofy, smiley type, always wanting to make people laugh, and that's good for me, because thinking about him makes me happier. He struggles a bit more academically, but he shines with his peers. He is super creative. He loves playing with his rabbit and also, of course, loves jumping on the trampoline. My son now throws tantrums on his remote days, frustrated and burned out from the online supposed learning experience. It's been hard to find social interactions that provide the same richness and depth as in-school interactions do. He begs me daily to send him to a school that goes full-time and asks why I can't just call the principal and tell him kids need to go back to school. This is why I'm here today. I know calling the principal won't do the job. I'm here advocating for my children to get back in the classroom full-time, where they belong. I cannot sit idly by while I cross my fingers that my children will hopefully, maybe, get some normalcy back in their lives. I always tell my kids where there's a will, there's a way. I'd like to believe our board truly wants to get our children back in school full-time. I really want to believe that, but I'm starting to doubt it. Please show our district parents and children what you truly value and find the way to get them back in full-time school. In the meantime, our kids are paying the price. Online learning should not be accepted as an adequate substitute for in-person learning. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is April. I live at 53 West Auburndale Avenue in Cortland, and I have a 1st grader at South Perry Elementary. And I first want to thank all the educators and staff who have made this year possible. I know it's been really hard on them, and I just want to thank them. On behalf of my son, his name is Tate. He's going to be 7 at the end of this month. And he's a very hyper-energetic little boy. And this past month being at home learning has been quite the struggle. We also have a 4-year-old and a 19-month-old, so you can imagine how stressful it is trying to keep my little boy who doesn't like to sit still for 5 minutes, focused on what he's supposed to be doing while entertaining my 2 younger ones. I know I'm not alone in that, and the struggle is real, real, real. You know, I am also a substitute teacher, and the past few weeks I have been substituting at an elementary school who has been doing 5 days in-person learning. It may not be all day, it is half day, but I can tell those kids are thriving, even if it's just 2.5 hours. They're getting that face-to-face time with their teacher, and it's wonderful. You know, every morning they have teachers out there checking temperatures, they're hand sanitizers, they're making it work, they're spaced out. I understand space is an issue, but there's ways around it. I've seen it, you know, I'm there, I've witnessed it, it's great. You know, I also have concern for kids who are on IEPs. You know, it's a real struggle for them. I personally have neighbors whose kids are diagnosed with ADHD, and how detrimental that education has been to them. You know, it's not the kid's fault, it's not the teacher's fault, it is what it is, but that needs to be addressed. These kids are falling behind and they're struggling. They're gonna be moved on to the next grade without having understanding the fundamentals, the basics of what they should know now. I know my son is behind in math, reading. We try working with them, but you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. We don't have the tools the teachers do to make these kids successful. Oh, excuse me. I just really hope that we can get back to 5-day in-person learning, whether it be half days. I understand it's a struggle, but you know, anything is better than this, what we're going on now. If there are families out there who choose to do fully remote, I'm sure there's ways we can have educator focus on the fully remote systems and let our other educators focus on the students and families that want to be in their 5-day. I know I have more to say, but I forgot, and I just want to thank you for your time and your patience. I know it's not easy on your end, but thank you.
April, can we get a last name?
My last name's April Fullerton is my name.
Thank you.
No, I'm nervous. My name is Jennifer Crouch. I have 2 sons that attend South Prairie and the middle school. What else am I supposed to say? Okay, 3 minutes. I don't have a timer and I didn't plan this, so you guys will have to just stop me because I ramble a lot. I usually write everything down and proofread it a million times before I send it, but I guess I came here today because my friend said she's coming, and I'm like, well, I'll go with you. I know you're nervous, I'll go with. And then I come here and I feel like I would do my kids a disservice to just sit there. No offense to anybody else, but just on me to not come up here and say something. And I don't want to get emotional because it's not a weakness, moms, when we get emotional. That's when we get into fight mode, and people should be scared, not looking at us like, oh, poor you. So that's that. Just as a human, me and my husband are both, you know, he's a foreman that runs a crew and puts gas main in the ground, so we all have stoves and things can blow up. I work in human resources, so talking about mental health and taking care of people is my jam every day. And so many times I've gone to work the whole time. A lot of my people went home. We sent the salespeople home, and okay, but my warehouse people had to stay, and so I had to stay, and I'm not a hero, but I didn't want them to the lowest of the people, you know, so I stayed. But I have my kids, and you can hear from many of my teachers, my principals, I'm a beast when it comes to my kids, because I was raised in a situation where it was single parents and drugs and poverty and bad and not good. And going to school was, there you go. It mattered. It super mattered. And I mean, my kids are lucky because they're not going to have any of that. They're not going to struggle the way that I struggled, and they're not going to get messed with, and they're not going to be alone and all that. But then I think about the kids that are like me kids, and those are the ones that I'm the most emotional for, because I know what that feels like to not have all the things that it's not fair that all the normal kids had. You don't have that, and so there's a lot of those kids here. And just because we live in Sycamore doesn't mean that we don't have those kids. They don't just live in DeKalb or somewhere else. They live here too. I didn't plan any of this. But anyways, me and my husband, we're essential the whole time. He's going to see crews all across northern Illinois, everywhere. I have my people, and we kept going. My sons, luckily, are super, you know, they're I'll get to the school part. They're really good in school. They, high honor rolls and advanced math where they're going to the other grades and they're awesome. But they play travel sports. So my kids last year, we were playing ball all year. Now, Sycamore wasn't, but my travel team was. AYSO didn't play. My travel team did. And there's nothing wrong. They had a ton more people to worry about, and ours was a smaller group. But, our coaches said, hey, one family doesn't want to do it, we won't do it. And we all said we want to do it. And we were so happy that through all the stuff and all the bad and all the fear and locked up, we were still living and we were still doing things. And so it's super hard, on my kids, because they're like, yeah. I'm like, no, you gotta respect, we gotta do this, gotta do that. But it's like when they see their parents going to school, work every day, and they come home hearing all of our stories of all of our stuff, and they're playing baseball, they're playing soccer, they're doing all this stuff, they're living their lives, but they just can't go to school. And these women all brought all this data and all this awesome ideas. You can use us. Can we email you guys ideas and brainstorm? And because if you get some moms together, dads too, sure, but the moms, and we will get it done. We'll come up with plans, and we make magic happen. Like, how do we keep waking up and going to life every day? Because I'm telling you, there's days where I can't. I go in my room and I play on my phone, and then I'm being bad. And I can tell you, I guess if more of these meetings come, then I'm gonna come. And so I have to say it in front of people, so hold myself accountable. I'm gonna come, and I'll bring 5 more people, we'll bring 10 more people, and then we're gonna have a whole flock of people, and we're gonna be here till you kick us out. But we can't, I think a lot of us as adults, or parents, whatever, that we just kind of rolled over. We're tired, we're this, we're that, we're all the things you guys feel too, but we can't just keep letting this happen for our kids. Like I said, there's so many kids that are at school and they're going, wear the mask, follow the rules. They're just defeated. And like I said, my kids are really awesome at their grades and they're good at school and they're struggling. And then it stinks because their A goes down to a D because they've got 5 missing assignments.
Thank you. Your time's up.
I don't hear my phone if he doesn't know. Thank you.
Hello there, James Cerny, 13600 Baseline Road. I don't really want to say anything, but my wife, how that goes. So, and I asked her why. She's like, well, you're looking at houses in Florida. So I'm like, yeah. And I kind of just thought, I don't know much about politics or school boards or anything and how it works, but I did want to say we moved here in 2008. I got 4 children. 3 of them graduated from Sycamore. And you all should be proud of your teachers, your athletic director, your coaches, and your whole staff. Because my daughter Hannah's on your wall there as you first walk into the school. She graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 2020. She's a second lieutenant in Intel down in Texas there. And Sarah, the second one, she took your dance team, placed 3rd in state, first time in the history of the school. Because you're a talented dance instructor. I'm not good on names, I got an old brain, I'd like to name them all. And then my boy James, the rugby coach, which your athletic director allowed rugby, which probably a lot of schools wouldn't do, which is one of the reasons we moved out here, rural, kind of more common sense type approach. And he's doing stuff in the Marine Corps I can't talk about, but he's doing real well. And then my last son wants to go to service academy. But you can't go to service academy if you don't go to school. So we got a problem. A lot of schools are open, different states. Florida, parochial schools are open here, private schools. The schools that one of these ladies talked about. And I'm not here talking about my problems because I can move. I got the means to do it. It's no problem. But suffering that's going on with, like, if you got a disabled kid and you need the services of the school, or if you got not enough money and you rely on the school lunches and the daily, participation, that's unconscionable, really. And I'm not sure what the angle is between the teachers and the school. I know a lot of teachers, great teachers. You got your Majerus's, your Lambdens, these guys will do whatever you want. I know it. And so I know there's politics and angles, but let's try to figure it out, okay? I'm gonna stay, and I want to come to the meeting to see what happened. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say and what's gonna happen without changing goalposts, without, playing the politics. And like I said, I don't understand it. But I'd like a clear statement on what's gonna happen in the fall. Because if the schools are open, I'm in. I love this place. That's it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to address the board? Next item then, communications, correspondence, informational items. Letters and newsletters. FOIA requests. Committee reports.
Yes, the grant committee met this morning. We had 8 grants submitted that will be evaluated at the board meeting 2 weeks from yesterday. So, one of the grants will probably go back into our budget.
Citizens Advisory Committee met on Thursday night, myself, Steve, and a handful of parents. Obviously a big topic is return to learn plan in general. So we had a lot of discussion in regards to that, and then not just solely getting back into schools, but obviously a lot of other discussion that the parents have brought forward, a lot of different thinking, and I know one part that kind of stuck with me is just the continued communication back to the community that what's going on, what's happening, that planning is actually happening, like stuff is going on in the background. I think that's a big thing that spent a lot of time on it, but if it was brought up and it kind of just stood out in the forefront, and I'm sure we'll get to a lot of the return to learn plan stuff as we get into that, but that was definitely, I think, a beneficial meeting, a lot of discussion, and yeah, good use of time for sure.
Other committee reports?
You guys speak up, we're trying to hear you.
No, it's got to stay there, from what we've been told. Next item is superintendent's report. Try to be louder.
I'll do my best to project. If you can't hear me in the back, just wave your arms and I'll do my best to speak up. First of all, just want to thank everybody for being here. A lot of great comments from parents. A lot of those ideas we've discussed and are discussing. I'll touch on some of those tonight. Appreciate your involvement, appreciate the comments. There are a lot of great ideas out there. We, as James mentioned, we are sifting through all of those ideas and have been developing plans. I understand frustration that those aren't publicized yet. There are reasons for that, but we are, I think, nearing the point where we're getting that information out so everybody knows about that. There are still some unknowns, and I'll talk about that, but just want to start by saying thank you to everybody, for being here and for your comments. I think it's all really valuable. I'm going to do my best, again, to project. We'll have a little bit different setup tonight. Let's see if I can kind of go back and forth. At the beginning of my comments, we always talk about our mission, empowering all learners to succeed in the world. We talk about the district's vision, providing an ideal learning experience. We always talk about our core values, honesty, trustworthiness, integrity, equality, empathy, respect, citizenship, digital citizenship, responsibility, and collaboration. And then our professional learning communities always are looking at these 5 questions, and they're listed there. I won't read through all of those. We talk about those every meeting, and those are things that our professional learning committees, our communities, our teachers, and our staff talk about. Before I get going with Return to Learn, we actually have some comments from Mr. Wesley, who's here from South Prairie. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. Mr. Wilder's and I talked for about 45 minutes, but I'm going to cut this to about 20 or so because that's what Nicole recommended. So we had 25 minutes or so. So just want want to go through, we have some thank yous to talk about, some exciting news about the students being back, a couple photos of parallel teaching. February is a variety of events, touch on student data, and then some of the challenges that what we still are kind of dealing with. All right, so thank yous. A ton of thank yous to shout outs to make. So the first one is to the tech staff, specifically South Prairie. It's TJ Lynn and Terry Crawford, but they do that in conjunction with the tech department, Roxanne and Ed, etc. Picture on the left, I was taken Sunday evening, but those are a bunch of the Chromebooks that are going to be distributed starting tomorrow for 4th and 5th grade. So that is a giant hooray for South Prairie and the elementary students. And then to the right, you can see a picture of what I like to call Mount South Prairie. Maintenance staff has been doing an amazing job clearing parking lots, sidewalks, and dealing with heat issues with these super cold temperatures. So Mr. Exterman and his staff, and specifically Valtricia and Don at South Prairie, have been just doing a fantastic job. The office staff, specifically South Prairie, Beth Smith, doing what she has to do just as a building secretary in a normal year, and then on top of everything else, all the variables that our hybrid learning affects as far as meal schedules and schedule changes and just dealing with everything there. So she's doing great for us. And then I would be remiss if I don't mention Lori Stover down at the admin building. She's doing an amazing time preparing. This is a really tough time for us because we're trying to finish strong this year and plan for next year. So believe it or not, registrations open up really soon for next school year. So Lori's taking the lead on that, as well as the designation changes that we'll be talking about as we move to the next phase of hybrid. Very recently, last week, we had a devastating loss to the South Prairie community. One of our first graders passed away, and it was, I had never dealt with that in my career, and it was absolutely devastating, but I just have to make a shout out to Mrs. Cam, our social worker. She's absolutely amazing. Trying to explain loss to a classmate to first graders is something I never thought I really would have to deal with, and she did an amazing job. But also, when you have a staff member like Mr. Carlson at the high school, when I learned this news at about 7 last Tuesday morning, I called Mrs. Cam right away. She works between the high school and South Prairie, so she said, call Tim, he'll know what to do. And sure enough, it was one of the situations where he knew what the answer was before I even asked. As soon as I said, I lost a kid this morning, he was like, this is what I'm going to do. And he just walked me through what needed to happen and sent his social work department guidance counselor over to South Prairie. And it's just awesome to be a place where you're going through really hard times and you're not alone. So it's just shout out to Tim and the social work guidance in the high school. Mr. Franks and the North School staff, they provided a luncheon for us on the following day, just to give us a little bit of light after dealing with the loss of Tess. I would also be remiss if I don't talk about the elementary principals. We still meet almost every day. We text at least 6 days a week. They help me through the loss, also South Prairie, but then just everything they do for their students, their staff, and their parents. And we try to keep it light as much as possible. We try to laugh every single time we have a meeting. So it's great to be part of that elementary team. The South Prairie staff and all school staffs, as you heard tonight from the parents, this parallel teaching model is hard. It's hard on the kids. It's hard on the staff. It's hard on the parents. Our staffs are stepping up. They're being creative. They're really doing everything they can to make a difficult situation best for the students. Really, one of the silver linings that I will tell you is just how effective they are at teaming. At so many of my grade levels, the teammates, teachers have been such better teammates this year because they've had to rely on each other, and they can't just shut their door and teach in a silo. They are constantly working with each other to meet the needs, the diversity of these students. And the South Prairie staff is rocking it every single day. Last two shout outs is just shout out to parents. As we mentioned, it's hard on families. We had our first in-person PTO meeting last Monday night. It was awesome to see PTO parents coming out, volunteering for leadership positions, and just trying to find whatever they can do to make this school year as normal as possible. So it's awesome to see the parents that are doing everything for our students and our staff. And then lastly, this is kind of out of the ordinary, but we have 2 retirements in January. Jean and Annette Irving from the Transportation Department retired after 35 years of service, each of them for the Sycamore Transportation Department. That is even longer than Mr. Dombeck's been serving on the board, if anybody's keeping track, but 35 years is a really long time. I think I did the math. I think if I would have been in this district, they could have been my bus drivers when I was in 7th grade. So that's how long ago that was. Jean was our head mechanic, position he held for 16 years, and Annette had worked in the transportation office for more than 20 years. They helped countless families, students, staff throughout their careers, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Gina and Annette. They would tell you that they don't need any recognition, but I thought it would be suitable to share a shout out to them. So 35 years each is pretty awesome. All right, next slide. Students are back. You can see some 3 different photos. Kindergarten class on the left-hand side, all sitting down, working. You can see Ms. Lancer there. In the middle picture there, actually, that's the student Tate that was mentioned. That's him right there, right next to me when I took that picture. They're lined up to get ready to go outside for recess and enjoy the fresh air and their friends. And then on the right side is just students just finishing lunch, but you can see the tables where they're socially distanced and really just being kids at South Prairie. So I would love to be able to say all students are back, but the students that are back are doing a great job. Here's a couple of pictures of parallel teaching going on. Our 1st grade class on the left-hand side, we've combined them, so our class size is about 16. And then Ms. Richardson and Mr. McDonald share those students and share responsibilities. It's kind of unique to South Prairie, but that's the approach we're taking at 5 of our 6th grade levels, and also EC. And then on the right-hand side is the 3rd grade classroom. You can see the 50-inch TV. You can see Mrs. Eitler at her desk she has 10 students in her room and then 13 on the screen, trying to keep them engaged. And just the effort that takes is absolutely tremendous. Well, we're trying to keep kids engaged at school. We also have to think about keeping kids engaged at home. We brought back the Principal's Challenge, so this was in December, so this was a bridge challenge, and this was really twofold. Number one, we want to engage these students and see their smiley faces and get their pictures taken, but also we need content for our yearbook, right? Our yearbook's going to look a lot different without the fun fairs and all those things. So parents have been awesome to send in the pictures of the kids doing different things. So you can see a variety of bridges that were part of the Bridge Challenge. We'll move into February. So February is Black History Month. So this is a picture of Dr. Clavin's Bitmoji classroom, and each one of those books, you can click on a link, and sometimes you'll have the author reading, or sometimes you'll have a special guest reading. But just a great opportunity to teach Black history in our schools, and I know all 5 elementary schools have added quotes from Black historical figures to their morning announcements for both the at-home students and the in-person students. Let's have a few more fun pictures. So Thursday is our 100th day of school, so we're super excited about that. So we have 5 different photographs of kids doing pictures representing 100-day event. So we've had about, I think I got 2 more today since the board meeting has started. So I think it was about 55 of these. You can see how creative they are, from the Legos to the 100 cartwheels to Mia on the right there. That's 100 seconds. The first I go, well, actually showing me a minute 40 seconds, but 100 seconds. So that's awesome. Finley up there with their giant stack of books. Great to see the kids using books. Hopefully they're reading them too, but also to make 100 days pretty fantastic as well. And then snow day activity, we asked the parents to take pictures of snow day activity. On the far left, that's kind of a combo here, transition, because that's a 100-inch snowman that she made for the 100th day. So that's Rachel, and she had some help from her brothers and also some help from some of the students down in Cortland. They created a 100-inch snowman, so that's a fantastic picture. And then you have of a parent and a kid making snow angels. You see Rory and Trigan with thumbs up on a snow day, and then we have yoga going on. So again, just keeping these kids engaged at home and at school. In January, you guys heard talk about student data, and I was so excited to hear data, so I want to just talk about just for a moment, and hopefully this could fall into someone to better talk about data down the road. But MAP is super important, and I'm so glad we do that. And we do MAP in winter and spring for kindergarten, and then in the elementary world, 1st through 5th, in a typical year, we do it 3 times a year. It shows great longitudinal data, and it's a great starting point as a screener. But there's so much more assessment that we're doing depending on the needs of a student. So new last year was the next step in guided reading. It's a running record that we use in every grade, 1st through 5th. Super excited about really great readers. Also, that's brand new this year. That's a reading curriculum that we're using as an intervention at the elementary school. All kind of at a different level where we're doing it, but it's pretty fantastic. And one of the assessments we use for that is called Easy CBM, and that's like a 1-minute oral fluency. So the 2 things you get from that is how accurate the kid reads. So they read 117 words in a minute. How many words they read in that minute, first of all, and then how many were correct. So that happens for some of our students that are reading services. They get that every 2 weeks. So again, you can see that growth, which is fantastic to see and even more fantastic to share with our parents. The other part about really great readers that they do, it's really a phonics program, and it's not like the 1980s version of Hooked on Phonics, but it's really talking about the phonemic awareness, phonics, and then also the word attack strategies. And then with that really great readers program, we have basic decoding survey and advanced decoding survey that can be done at our benchmark times in both, in all 3 fall, winter, and spring. But one of the coolest parts about the Really Great Readers program is it's computerized based. So if I'm assessing a student, even in a remote model, they can engage with that app online while I'm running. So it was a great find for us this year. Super excited about it. Just a couple more. We have the formative assessments that we use during PLC. Really like exit tickets that we use all the time. ISIL is a kindergarten assessment that we use in lieu of some of the really great readers in that. And then some great news from the IAR. It looks like that we might be able to get a waiver in Illinois to not have to do the high stakes test this year. So fingers crossed with that. And now the challenges. One of the challenges we're trying to work through is creating a valid math data. We're really worried about if students are remote learners and they're taking this math test at home. Number 1, is it going to function right? And number 2, are they going to get help? So the 5 elementary schools are trying to figure out what the best way to get that math data. And then maybe if you can't get valid math data, maybe you wouldn't take math for 100% of our kids this year. Connectivity seems to be an issue, and I know the tech department's doing their best to figure that out, but if you're on a meet at 9:45 at any of our schools, you'll see students start phasing out, like their avatars will pop up and the actual live camera feed will disappear. That's incredibly frustrating. The first time it happened to me, I was in a meeting. I thought my teachers were messing with me because I just saw them, I thought they were turning off the cameras. But really what's happening is Google is not able to keep the voice and the image up, so it fades one away. And it just makes teaching online very, very difficult. Subs in just those non-certified positions, the lunchroom supervisors, all 5 elementary principals are constantly doing recess duty, lunch duty, all that because we can't get staff. And then when subs are out, because of all the contact tracing, et cetera, we have just some sub issues, so we're dealing with that on a daily basis. And then lastly is just engagement, keeping these students engaged. We can be super creative and communicate with parents, but that is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we're facing every single day. And with that, any questions that you may have for me?
Mr. Wesley, can you expand more on the technology issues? Because this is the first that I've heard about. I know at the beginning I'd asked a lot of questions because I was nervous about our ability to maintain connectivity for that many students and teachers simultaneously. Do you know if that problem is happening at the other elementary schools based on your conversations with them?
Yes, it's definitely happened at all 5 elementary schools for sure. And the tech department is in the process of trying to figure out what that is. Is it because the data they're sharing right now is that it's not peaking out, like our bandwidth is only using about half. So we've gone through trying to just problem solve, right? Is it because I'm running SmartBoard software? Is it because I'm wireless? Is it because I'm using the Tinies that were in the computer lab? So they're trying to check off what is causing the problem. And so that's where we're at right now. So I don't know that it's been going on for a couple of weeks, I would say, for sure, but I feel like the tech department is trying to navigate and solve that problem.
Hey, Greg, on the vaccine front, can you give kind of a feel for percentage of staff that have been vaccinated up to this point? Have you heard frustration from staff that they haven't been able to get vaccinated, or what does that look like?
So I'm doing my best to comply with HR and not know who's getting vaccinated and who's not. But I will tell you, when people say, hey, I want to get HR, I want to go get vaccinated, or that I need to leave early because I have an appointment, I feel like a lot of people are getting vaccinated. I know that in the last meeting, I think Mr. Wilder showed, so I feel like I have not had one single person from South Prairie say, I want to get a vaccine and I can't. As a matter of fact, I had a staff member today, she's very part-time, right? She works very, very part-time, and also a sub. They are on the list to get vaccinated soon. So I'm amazed at the problems that other counties are having compared to how well the DeKalb County Health Department is doing, because when I went over to get vaccinated myself at the Convocation Center, it was amazingly smooth. I mean, you would have to look around to find a problem because it was that smooth. And then to see other counties that are having trouble, I don't understand what's different from us to whatever, Kane County or McHenry County or whatever. It's just going so miraculously smooth here that I'm so thankful.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Craig, I know the situation's different for each school building, and I know Mr. Wilder is going to get to some of the other issues at district-wide, but can you speak for South Prairie specifically what the biggest problems are or obstacles that we need to overcome in order to get more students in the classroom on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so we talk about this every single day, and some of the ideas that parents brought up are exactly what we talk about every day. So if we wanted to do one of the original plans that we talked about, and Steve, I'm sorry for stealing your thunder, one of the original programs we looked at is, I think, what Burlington's doing, an AM PM model. That would have worked great, except our transportation couldn't support it completely. So that was that problem. People talk about extending the day. It makes a lot of sense. Part of the difficulty is, what do you do with the specials? What do you do with, if you're going to have an extended day, then you would need to have your specials time so classroom teachers can have their planning as per their contract. And right now, our gymnasiums are our isolation spaces. So, and if you would have talked to me last week, I would have said our isolation spaces don't need to be the gym. We don't even use them. I use them 3 times, prior to December 1st. Well, guess how many are going to use it this week? 3 times in 1 week. So you never know what's going to happen as far as what that could look like. I think that some of the other obstacles are just trying to be in a K-12 district where you have the different schedules. So if you're going to extend the day, or that's going to affect it too. So if you extend the day even by 35 minutes, how does that schedule change affect the middle school lunch or the high school lunch? Or there's so many moving parts. And not that I'm making excuses, but these are the roadblocks we've come up with so far. Are there solutions out there? There absolutely is. But I haven't seen a viable solution yet that we can just implement tomorrow.
What specifically, I guess from a transportation standpoint, is out of my own curiosity, is easier to implement in, say, a Burlington situation? And I'm not familiar with their school district, so maybe you can just help me understand what they're...
So I don't know how they're solving it. I can tell you that we literally don't have the buses available to have all of our elementary students and all of our middle school students on the bus at the same time.
I would add that it's a function both of the physical buses themselves, and jump in if I miss this, but it's also the drivers. You know, we are as thin as with bus drivers as we are with substitute teachers and close as we are in staff. So I would say it's a function of both buses and drivers and getting that many students moved around 4 times a day, you know, to and from in the morning, to and from at noon, to and from afternoon, to and from at the end of the day. With all the other transportation we do outside of the district, that's been the challenge.
I would say that one of the other challenges too is just the aspect of parallel teaching when you're asking teachers to do 2 different jobs. I mean, really, it's quite difficult. And so to be able to maintain the same classroom teacher, you know, so like Tate, for example, you know, if he has the same teacher, if his teacher becomes the remote teacher now in the 30th week of school or the 28th week of school, we're putting him in a different class. Is that acceptable? Originally, that was one of the worst things we could do, is ask people to have a first day of school, you know, come February, but, you know, that's one of the challenges.
Any other questions for Mr. Wesley? Okay.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir. So with that, I'm going to jump right into Return to Learn update. A lot of information to share. I'll do my best to not read this word for word, but kind of highlight things. First of all, Mr. Wesley touched on technology. Between 85 and 90% of the Chromebooks, the new Chromebooks at the middle school, have been handed out. The last group has to do with students who haven't been able to get to school, remote students who have not been able to get in. But the middle school staff is still working through getting those Chromebooks distributed to those students. At the same time, they are receiving Chromebooks and devices that have been handed out already. So as we hand out 880-ish Chromebooks, we're also collecting a large number, not quite that much, but a large number. They're cleaning them, disinfecting them, and as Mr. Wesley said, they're going to start distributing those at the elementary schools here this week. So that's really good news. We believe that all of our staff who chose to be vaccinated have received their first dose, and notifications to schedule the second vaccination started today. I actually had a small group that has already gotten their second dose previous to today, but those notifications started going out. So initially we received an email from the health department saying that staff could sign up to get their first vaccination, but your second vaccination is based on the date of your first one. So in this case, you get an individual email, you can schedule that, and that process has started. The first clinic is on February 18th and February 19th. That's a Thursday and a Friday. Unfortunately, those times are during the day. So on Thursday, the time is like 9 o'clock in the morning until I think 11:45 is the last appointment. That's right in the middle of the school day. Friday is a little bit better. It's in the 11 o'clock into the afternoon. Fridays are better for us because they are remote days in terms of getting teachers access to get vaccinated. But that's a huge challenge for us. So we talked about that today, and unfortunately one of the issues is that if we want staff to get vaccinated, we have to give them time to be able to do that. The other issue is that side effects with the second dose are much more likely than they were the first one. We had a small group got vaccinated last Friday, and over half of them would not have been able to report to work the next day. So we're anticipating, based on that, also feedback from the health department, that we will need to plan for a larger group of our staff unable to return to work after they get that second dose. So to that end, we're going to schedule a remote asynchronous day on next Thursday. Friday is already a remote day, just to give teachers, staff that access to go get the vaccination, give them time to work through any side effects that they've got, and then we'll be right back to in-person learning on Monday. We hate to do that, and we really got lucky with the first round of vaccinations that we didn't have to do that, but we really don't see any way around this. So we'll send a notification about that out this evening. It's one day, but that short-term, I think, challenge is going to get us closer to being able to get all of our staff that second vaccination dose, all of the staff who wanted the vaccination, I should say, and should help us continue to alleviate staffing issues. So there is some good news in there in the long term. In terms of vaccinations or COVID cases, there was a question that came up about notifications going out to parents. If there are positive cases, we are continuing to do that. If there's a positive case where there is a possibility that a student or a staff member may have been exposed to somebody who is COVID positive or symptomatic, we are still sending those notifications out. We're just really lucky that we haven't had to send them out right now because the positive cases or the symptomatic cases have involved students or staff, individuals who weren't in close contact with individuals in the school setting. So we will continue to do that. We just haven't had to do that, fortunately, because those situations haven't arisen. So I just want to share a little bit more academic data. I appreciate Mr. Wesley touching on some of the K-5 data that's starting to be collected and we've used, such as reading. So one of the things that worked out that I'm glad to report is that at the high school, at the beginning of the semester, there were 900 failing grades. That's not 900 students who were failing, but a total of 900 Fs when you looked at the entire student population. That number went from 900, and it gradually worked down throughout the first semester, really worked down the last couple of weeks after we returned from Christmas break, from 900 to 210. So after talking with some of the staff at the high school, I really want to give a shout out to the high school staff, teachers, as well as guidance counselors, administrators. Everybody pitched in to contact students and their families and work with them to get things turned in, to get students caught up. It was a monumental task, and they slowly chipped away at that throughout the first semester. So really glad to report that. One of the challenges is that the students that received Fs, some of those students were facing challenges outside of the school environment that were sometimes beyond the students' control. So the high school staff had some conversation and ultimately decided that students who received an F at the end of the first semester would receive an unsatisfactory grade, or a U, on their report card and their transcript. A U means much the same as an F in terms of credit was not received. The difference is it won't affect a student's GPA. So for students who are college bound or need that GPA for whatever reason, whether it's a job or another purpose of going to college, it's not impacted by a failing grade, but the student will still need to make sure that they earn enough credits to graduate from high school. So no credit was granted, it's just not going to impact their GPA. The graph on the right is actually from the middle school, and it shows the grade distribution for the first quarter and the second quarter. At the middle school, you can see that, it's hard to read, I'm sure from a distance, but there were 320 Fs in the first quarter, 363 in the second quarter. I don't like those numbers. If you took all the other numbers and bars away, I wouldn't be happy about that, but we are dealing with some challenging circumstances. If you look at the chart here from the middle school, the chart at the high school would be very similar. So there's a larger number of A's, B's, and C's, and then you can see how it gradually goes down to the number of F's. So overall, there were a lot more F's than I would like to see, but there were also a lot more A's and B's and a lot of student success at the middle school as well as the high school. I think both of those graphs would look very similar. COVID data continues to trend positively. I had to be careful about that because in this case, positive is good, not bad. Those numbers are going down. I'll show those numbers here in just a second. In fact, the Daily Chronicle, Shaw Media reported IDPH announced the lowest number of new or probable cases since October 6th. That takes us back to middle of the first part of the school year. I think that's great. We really, I think, should be kind of patting ourselves on the back throughout the community and the county that we've reached those numbers. All regions of Illinois are now back in phase 4. Staffing in our schools has not been a significant issue. So I want to stress not been a significant issue. It's not that it hasn't been an issue, and Mr. Wesley kind of talked about that at the elementary. The same is true at all 4 or 5 elementary schools, as well as the middle school and high school. Staffing is still a challenge, but it hasn't been the significant issue that it was prior to the adaptive pause in November. So we're in a much better spot there. Part of that is because our numbers are down. I'd like to say that it's because of maybe the vaccine or other reasons. I continue to think, and I did ask this question of the health department. We do meet regularly. She meets, the health department staff meets pretty regularly with the superintendents in the area. One of the reasons we think those numbers are down is because it's pretty cold outside, and there are much fewer social gatherings right now than there were in the first semester, things like holidays, Halloween, and Thanksgiving, and those sorts of things. As good as the news is, they have reminded us that you need to continue to be diligent. Mask up, back up, and wash up. All 3 of those are very important. And lastly, before I move on to the next slide, sporting events have started. We have a basketball game in the high school gym tonight. I had the opportunity to attend the first high school basketball game on Friday night. Pretty amazed at the students being able to participate with masks on. It's not easy to talk with the mask on, let alone play basketball. Student participants were spaced out. The staff to run the event were spaced out. We did have spectators. IDPH and IHSA limit sporting events to 50 spectators. Schools can handle that differently. Our conference, the Interstate 8 Conference, has decided collectively to allow 2 spectators for every home participant. So every basketball player last Friday for a conference event gets 2 spectators. Could be family members, could be friends. They get to come and watch, and 1 spectator for every visiting participant. So I don't recall who were playing tonight, but that team, if they're in the conference, 1 spectator would have been able to come and watch their student athlete play. Not all conferences have done that, however. So for example, over the weekend, we had a couple of non-conference games, and the visiting team, their conference does not follow this policy. So they only allow home spectators, not away spectators. So when that happens with a non-conference game, we respect that. We don't expect them to change the rules for us. And we want to be able to help them maintain consistency in the number of spectators that they're allowing. So that's how we're approaching spectators. That may change, especially as we get into the spring and outside events. But even as of now, the IDPH, IHSA and IDPH have limited outdoor events to 50 spectators, so including a football game in the spring. We'll continue to work with the IHSA on that. As I understand the frustration in the folks here, as well as parents and community members at home. The goalpost seems to change frequently, so we'll continue to monitor that, and hopefully we get a chance to play those games and maybe get some more spectators. So as I do every meeting, just want to share some data from the area. This is Region 1 data. This was taken this afternoon, so it's not the absolute most recent. This comes from February 6th, but the positivity rate was 3.9. That's a 7-day rolling average. In DeKalb County, the number is actually 3.3. I believe the newspaper reported that as the daily test positivity down in the 2, which is a great number, but things are trending in the right direction. And here are some graphical representations of that, still very similar data. This is the weekly data that we get from IDPH. Test positivity has gone down for the most part, other than a spike in early January. And the number of cases per 100,000 residents shows an even sharper gradual decline over the time from November to present. So next steps. First of all, we're still keeping an eye on the Chromebooks. The other order of Chromebooks that we've made, those aren't in yet. We don't have a ship date for those, but because we've received the other shipment, we do have a district, or we will have a district device in every student's hand soon. The two easiest switches, the two easiest transitions here mid-year would be extending the length of the school day to a full day or adding student attendance on Fridays. Originally, our hybrid plan included hybrid A students on Mondays and Wednesdays, hybrid B students on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then alternating on Fridays. I've heard feedback both ways. You know, I think some parents and community members would like to see the school 5 days a week. Some of them kind of like 4 days a week, but would like to see it go for a full day. I think a survey is absolutely not a bad idea, so I appreciate that suggestion. It's something that we've already been thinking about. Those are things we've already started to talk about. So we don't have a plan published yet. All the details of the plan aren't in place yet for either one of those two options, but these are things that we've been talking about since the fall. So now that we're able to be back in person since January, we're working through the details of both of these and the challenges. Things like lunch, what's that going to look like at the elementary school, lengthening the school day. We had that conversation. I think Mr. Wesley touched on this. They're utilizing the special staff, PE, art, fine arts, things like that, in other ways throughout the school right now. So in order to go for a full day, adding those classes back, those staff are no longer available. So that doesn't mean that we can't overcome that challenge, but it means that there's a challenge to be overcome. So things like that we have been working through and are continuing to work through. And ultimately, the plan is for a full return. I would love to see a full return. I hope everybody knows that. I appreciate that everybody's been very respectful. Everybody's been very passionate about what they want, and I certainly understand that. Almost everybody I've talked to has been very respectful and understanding that there's a lot of challenges. I hope that everybody knows that I want the same thing, which is a full return to in-person learning. As I've said from day one, I'm committed to doing that as soon as we can do that safely. I'm as frustrated as anybody is with some of the safety protocols and guidelines that are in place. And as much as personally, there are times that I'd just like to brush those aside and kind of do whatever I think is right. There are other considerations that have to be made, and we make decisions for all of the students throughout the district. So they're not easy. We weigh a lot of different things as we make those decisions. And I'll talk about some of the challenges here in just a second. We don't have an established timeline, although we've talked about a couple of timelines, so we're developing that. Really, there's a couple of timelines that make sense, so as we continue to plan, that'll be part of the plan that we publish. Circumstances have evolved throughout the pandemic, but the most significant hurdle to a full return is the 6-foot recommendation for distance between individuals, students and staff. Some districts have found a way to do that. Sometimes it's because they have lower enrollment and they have space that they can fit students in and still be 6 feet apart. I don't like to do this very often, but I know that there are some districts that know that that is the guideline and have chosen not to follow it for whatever reason. That's a decision that they make. Every school district is in a slightly different position. I think it's really important to be mindful of what the experts are telling us. The health department has been fantastic to work with throughout the pandemic. And if there's anybody that I know, any group that I know that is working as hard as our teachers and our staff is working right now, it's the health department. They are working on a skeleton crew as well. They are getting last-second information about vaccinations and other information from IDPH. They implement that as fast as they can, and a lot of times it's at the last minute. They're doing a phenomenal job. And like I think the area superintendents, myself included, they have been supportive of a full return to school as soon as it's safe. We continue to work with them. We talk with them regularly. They are often in superintendent meetings that are held almost weekly, and we have contact with members of the health department almost daily through our head nurse. So in our district office. So they've been phenomenal. They want students back in session. That 6-foot recommendation is critical. I know that some folks have referenced studies by American Association of Pediatrics, Journal of American Medicine, the CDC. All of them have talked about how schools are not super spreaders. I think that's been known now for several weeks, maybe several months. Every study I've seen always adds a disclaimer that schools aren't super spreaders because they follow safety protocols that other organizations are challenged to, not all, but some other organizations are challenged to follow. Face masks, social distancing, and regularly washing hands and disinfecting. So our health department has continued to recommend that. So we'll continue to work with them and look at options to either get around that 6 foot, to implement that safely, or if there are other ways to do that within the school. We've talked about a lot of ideas, and we will continue to talk about a lot of ideas until we come up with something that works. I think I've touched on all those bullet points. So there's been some questions that I want to try to answer, and I certainly won't get to them all. I would invite anybody that's here or watching online or watches this later, if you have questions, please contact me. I'm glad to share information. I don't always have the answer to questions, but I'll be glad to share information as I can. What could help us transition to a full return to in-person learning? Kind of hit on this last board meeting. I talked about it generally. That was my goal. I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail this time. Student vaccinations are an obvious action or strategy that would allow us to return to in-person learning. It's not the only. I think I talked about that before and probably didn't hit on that enough, so I apologize. It's the most obvious, but it's also going to be a real challenge because the vaccinations haven't been approved for students yet. They're likely not to be approved for students for a little bit longer, and it will come in phases. You know, it's not going to be all the way down to kindergarten. It's going to come in, in phases, down to 12, down to 9, down to 5 possibly. So we'll continue to work with the health department. They monitor that very closely, and they keep us informed. It's also unlikely that they will be required for some time. The State Board of Education has issued requirements for some vaccinations. The flu vaccine is not one that is required, it's optional. But there are other vaccinations that are required for all students. There are waivers for students not to have to take those. They're pretty limited. But we have parents, like I think all school districts do, that take advantage of those waivers and advantage of those exemptions. It's been very clear that the State Board will not require the COVID vaccination for some time. At least not until it's approved on a permanent basis as opposed to being approved on an emergency basis, which is likely to come first. So while student vaccinations would get us to a full return, we're still a ways out from that unless things progress faster than we anticipate. It's not the only option for us to return to learning fully. One of the other changes that could happen is some sort of change in the 6 foot recommendation, or the 6 foot recommendation with some other added strategies like plexiglass dividers, which we are using in our schools already to some extent. That does help students when they are stable, sitting in their chair, for example. As students move around, it becomes a little challenging, but it doesn't mean that they can't be used in those situations either. If we can get around that 6 foot or implement strategies to maintain 6 feet or some additional barriers like plexiglass, those are things we are considering now in order to get students back more fully. And I kind of referenced this earlier, but I'll say it again. Things have evolved throughout the pandemic. Early on in August, July, September even, it seemed like the rules were changing almost every day. They would change on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'd have a board meeting the next week, and by Tuesday of the board meeting, the rules had changed again. It's not been as volatile over the last couple of months, but guidance from the CDC, the IDPH, and the health department continues to evolve. We'll continue to watch that and work with them as best we can. I would not be surprised, although I'm not, this is pure personal speculation, I wouldn't be surprised if there are changes in the safety protocols, baby specific for schools, that might come out here in the next couple of months. So we never know when those things are going to happen. We keep our ear to the ground, and the health department does a good job of keeping us informed if they think that those things are going to change. If there are other changes in the safety protocol, we will absolutely take a look at those and take advantage of those if at all possible to get students back faster. So some of the questions that have been posed. What about federal funds? Will those help? Those will help with some of the equipment and supplies that we need, such as PPE, face masks, gloves, gowns. Absolutely, there's still a need for PPE. Federal funds would help us purchase more plexiglass, so that's certainly a use for those funds. President Biden, now that he is in office, has indicated that he wants schools back in session and wants to give schools the resources to do that. In our neck of the woods, staffing would be an issue, but space is the biggest one. We are using the field house. We are using gyms. We are using cafeterias. We are using libraries as best we can to space out students. The bulk of the space is in the classrooms, but we are using every space in schools to the best of our ability in order to get students spaced out so that we can maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. I'm not sure at this point that any more federal or state funds would help that, but we're going to take advantage of every penny that we can get. There was a question about trying to get more substitute teachers. Can we pay them more? Can we do things to incentivize people to substitute for us? I think we've done a pretty good job of making a call for substitute teachers, not just here in Sycamore, but in the area. I can tell you that I speak with superintendents around the state, and it's the same issue everywhere. There just are not enough people who are interested in doing that, and a lot of the regular subs that we've had in the past, as well as other school districts, have regular subs who just aren't comfortable coming into schools quite yet. Now they have the opportunity to get vaccinated if they're on a list through the ROE, and so some of them may feel more comfortable after they are vaccinated. We have done some things. We have increased the pay rate for substitute teachers. I think we've made a call for substitute teachers. We've talked about it, and volunteers. We've talked about it here at board meetings, and we just have not had a rush of people signing up to do any of those jobs. We have people who are doing those jobs, and we absolutely appreciate it. A lot of those times they get signed up and then they work directly with principals like Mr. Wesley to get into the schools and help us with staffing. But we are still running pretty tight in terms of staffing, and despite some of the incentives that we've tried to put in place for subs. How are other schools opening fully? I've kind of addressed that. Sometimes it's lower enrollment. Sometimes schools that have made the decision to make decisions that fly in the face of the recommendations. Those are theirs, those decisions. I don't fault them for that, but that's a different school district in a different community. Have we revisited our instructional model? I think I've tried to talk here at board meetings, but also within the school district. I'm always open to ideas and suggestions. One of the things that we talked about earlier, and Mr. Wesley kind of touched on this, was having separate remote teachers for remote learners and in-person teachers for in-person students. One of the challenges, there are a variety of challenges with that, but one of the challenges, particularly at the elementary school, is that it would create a situation where you've got students going back and forth and switching teachers. So students who are remote would be coming back to hybrid with a different teacher. We do have students that still move from hybrid to remote. It's not that that can't be done, but there are challenges to that, and as a parent of an elementary student as well as a high school student, for my elementary student to switch teachers mid-year would be difficult to do. It's not that it can't be done, but that's one of the things that we weigh when we're making decisions like that. So that's just one other instructional model, but we are looking at and have always been open to other instructional models if we can find something that will work. I will say, and I do want to go on record with this one, I know the disruption that changing instructional model can have for families, so I don't want to do that frequently. The designation changes come at the end of every 9 weeks. We offer that to families. We'll be doing that here a little bit earlier in March because of spring break and wanting to get things done before spring break. But I am sensitive to changing the model or days or things like that mid-year because of the impact it's going to have on families. Even sometimes when the instructional model is going to give students more time, it can still have an impact. So I am sensitive to doing that too much. I think consistency is a really good thing. I think we're starting to get into a rhythm here, students, parents, and teachers and staff with the hybrid model that we're using. However, I would love to get students in school more. So if we can do that safely and we can plan for that, make that announcement, work with staff to plan for that in advance, I definitely want to do that. I just don't want to be changing the instructional model a ton during the school year. I've done a lot of talking. I'm almost out of water here and the water bottle, but I would be glad to answer any questions from the board.
I don't have any water, but I will just start rambling a little bit. a few things have been brought up, and there's some great parent participation tonight, and I love that, and I love how vocal they've been and the effort that they've put in online and some of our interactions as well, trying to find any way they can to help us and the district be successful. So thank you to the parents that did come and continue to support us. I'll go through, there's a few things that have been going through my head. One of them is you kind of mentioned the constant change in safety protocols, but I think the one thing that's probably frustrated me the most is that 6 foot hasn't changed. It hasn't been addressed by the CDC, it hasn't been addressed by IDPH, and it hasn't been addressed by the county health department. It's been that way since this whole thing started last March, I feel like. They kind of set that 6 feet in stone and never went back and addressed, okay, well maybe, if that is the biggest limitation to us and every other district getting back in person, you'd think it would get a little bit more discussion, more scientific studies behind it, and I find it interesting to contrast the way the U.S. is approaching it with, say, the WHO, which still says, and has said all along, that 3 feet was the social distancing minimum. So I guess I would be very interested in us pursuing more feedback, more proactive interactions with the county health department to understand that 6 foot, which again, in your words and their words and everyone's words, is a recommendation, not a requirement, but it's a recommendation. How bad would it be if we went to 5 feet, 4 feet? And I know I asked that back in September-ish time frame, what is that minimum distance that we would have to achieve to get everyone back in class? Given our most restrictive classroom setting, is it 4.5 feet, is it 5 feet? And then I think the board would be in a position then to make maybe that risk judgment of, are we comfortable going down to 5 feet or 4 feet, knowing the recommendation is 6, but knowing that parents or staff are comfortable and the board and community are comfortable going down to this smaller requirement. So that is something I'd like for us to proactively engage in. The second, I guess, is more just the broad topic of vaccines, and I don't want to get into the politics of who gets it and who doesn't, and why not. But it does strike me that the vaccine, the purpose for getting the vaccine is, 1, to reduce community spread, and 2, to keep people from dying and being in the hospital. And I think our biggest concern from the beginning has been to protect people where we can, but most importantly to protect the highly vulnerable, which in our case, in a school setting, the highest vulnerability population are your teachers, especially your older teachers. So if we're now at a point, or will soon be at a point, where our teachers are as protected as they want to be from a vaccination standpoint and from I'm 6 feet away from every student in my class, I guess how far do we have to go to ensure that we're trying to protect the students from themselves? And by that I mean, if we talk about wanting all of the students to have, or saying that vaccines for students is a solution to the problem, if every parent is already saying, we aren't going to get the vaccine, or even if it's available or not available, I'm still comfortable sending my kid to school because I know they've got a 0.0001% chance of something bad happening to them, and I as a parent am comfortable if they bring it home and give it to me, and yada yada. I mean, I feel like at some point we're making too many decisions for them when we've already said, if you're not comfortable, you have remote, and if you're comfortable, we're going to stick you in a classroom where you're 3.5, 4, or 5 feet apart, whatever that is. So those are kind of the two big things I think that stick out for me that need to be addressed, and I guess I don't feel like we yet, as a board, have made a decision on those things. We've talked about them being obstacles, but we've never, held a vote or said, okay, in order for us to go any further, this is what we need to do. Where do we all stand? So I would like for us to get to that point. I'm not saying tonight, because I think we need more preparation, but as we get to that point where all the teachers are vaccinated over the next 3-4 weeks, I think we do, as a board, owe it to the community to make a conscious decision about how aggressively we're going to pursue that next step.
A couple of really good points, and let me comment just really quickly. So your frustration with the 6 feet of social distancing is one, it's a question I raised with the health department here recently, whether or not they anticipated that was going to change at the IDPH level or CDC. Actually, the response was that the CDC hasn't ruled out a 10-foot social distancing guideline, which I can't believe, but I don't see it changing to be farther apart. If anything, I think the CDC, especially in schools, would consider a shorter distance if maybe some other things are in place, like plexiglass that was recommended. But I have approached that topic and you can talk to folks at the health department who don't anticipate it changing soon, but also are aware of the research that's out there. So there's a lot of frustration I think here, even locally, that 6 feet is in place. There's not a little bit more flexibility, but until that changes, I think we need to be kind of watching that. I would recommend that if the board wants to consider a shorter distance and what the board might be comfortable with, I would recommend that the board consider a 3-foot social distancing guideline. I don't know that 5 feet or 4 feet makes that much of a difference. 3 feet is about the length of an adult person's arm, a little bit shorter than that for younger students. I think if the board wants to consider any deviation from that 6 feet, I would encourage the board to think about a full return is going to mean that students are going to need to be, I think, at least 3 feet apart. We can still try to space them out as best we can. And at that point, if the board were comfortable with that, and I agree that's not a decision that should be made tonight, but I would encourage the board to kind of keep 3 feet in mind. At that point, one of the things we've talked about way back in the fall, and is still, I think, something to consider, is allowing parents to sign a waiver if a shorter distance is considered. I think that's also something that is going to have to be discussed with the staff as well. We have a large portion of our staff who have opted for vaccinations, but we still have a large portion that have opted not to be vaccinated. And that's a decision that I think, that it's a personal decision that everybody makes. I would encourage everybody to be as informed as they possibly can as they make that decision. We cannot require staff to be vaccinated. So even if we were to consider, let's say, a 3 feet social distancing guideline, I think everybody still needs to be aware that there's a large portion of staff who have opted not to be vaccinated and might not feel comfortable. So then we would have to kind of think through what the staffing implications of that, and part of that would be getting feedback from the community. If we offer waivers, how many people would be interested in that, and how many who have kids in school might not be willing to do that. So you can see that once you make a decision like that, all these other dominoes start to fall, and you have to be aware of that. I think we've talked about these from time to time, so I won't go into much more detail, but I would say that if the board were going to consider deviating from the 6 feet, I think the board needs to consider that 3 feet would be in my mind, the next logical 6 foot or social distancing guideline.
I think it would be great to have those surveys regardless of whether it's something that gets implemented this year or if it's just in preparation for the fall, not knowing what the guidance or viral environment's going to be like with these other variants. It's just too hard to say, and I know there's a lot of people looking for some definitive answer for what the fall is going to look like, and to them I just say I have no idea what 2 weeks from now is going to look like. It's great seeing those trends. I would hate to see that reverse because a different viral strain comes here that isn't currently, our immunity isn't effective against, or our vaccines aren't effective against. The other issue I did want to bring up, and it was a great point that a parent raised, is that in our Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday AV schedule, we do have a lot of Monday holidays where those in-person students are not getting their in-person time. Creates a bit of a disparity between those two groups. And knowing that we still have several of those holidays ahead of us, with at least the suggestion between now and when we are able to use Fridays for regular in-person, that maybe those A-day kids get moved to that Friday, so that we're at least keeping them in class the same amount as their B group peers.
I think that's a really good point, and we are kind of monitoring that so that we don't get too far out of balance. We missed the students who were not in session on January 18th, Martin Luther King Day. We're going to miss Monday. We had a snow day and a hybrid B day, so that kind of offsets it a little bit. Next Thursday is going to end up being a full remote day to allow for vaccination. So we are kind of watching that and making an adjustment on a Friday. It would be a really easy way to do that, and that's something that we can do and will do if that really starts to get out of balance. So that's a good point.
I guess, I would agree with what Eric said in exploring it and getting to a point, and I think you addressed it, Steve, was if 3 foot would be what we're recommending, I want to know for sure that would actually do the job then at that point, because if we're still having an issue, that would definitely be something I'd want to consider. But In the immediate future, we brought up at the last board meeting the extending the school day or going to the every other Friday, A1 Friday, B1 Friday. When can we expect a decision on that or more steps? Or, just me sitting here as a person, I would assume that getting back to 5 days a week, we haven't even gone through a full school day yet. So that seems like another step in the right direction. Do we have any anticipation of when we can expect that, or when we could see a plan of what that looks like, or get it rolling even?
Sure. I think what I'd like to recommend, and what I had kind of been planning and thinking about doing, is at the next board meeting, having a discussion about that. If we can get a draft plan out ahead of that, I'd like to do that. We have to have some conversation, obviously, internally. I would also want to be really clear that I probably wouldn't attach a timeline to that at that point. It's going to take some time to have some discussion to get through the planning phase. But we've already had some of those conversations. I think we can put a rough plan together, not even a rough plan, a plan with some detail that we can share, we can have some discussion about. At the same time, we're working towards, that portion of our staff getting that second vaccination. So that moves us kind of in the right direction. We'll continue to have data about, where the trends are in terms of the region and the county. But I would recommend that we have a discussion about that at the next regular board meeting in 2 weeks. Have a plan for the board to, I would be glad to go through that. I might have some other staff help with parts of that plan, and then have a discussion about how that looks.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great, because I feel like, in the immediate future, trying to get some of that off the ground, that's headed that's a step in another direction. It's more hours inside the school. Especially we talk about, it's funny you brought up the A thing, because I was going to bring up the B thing. I was saying, B's already been hit with the snow day. We got the 18th coming up. So just interesting, the two separate perspectives there. I guess, you did a great job with explaining the vaccination, because it was a big question I got right after the board meeting. Like immediately, the texts were flowing and calls were coming in regards to, I heard we need to have a vaccination or we're not coming back, and that's not going to be for 2 years, and all the other stuff that goes along with that. But Sycamore School District cannot mandate a vaccine. We could never say, based on current rules, who knows, whatever, anything is possible, right? But right now, that would have to come down from the state level, and I just want to make sure it's being said, just because I got so many questions on it this week. The state would have to mandate it, which would then force it down to schools.
Correct. So a couple steps in that process. First of all, my understanding is that the CDC would need to, before it can be required.
Sure.
Not just kind of temporary emergency approval, but required. The vaccine would have to go from emergency approval to permanent approval. Across the country. And then it would have to be mandated by the State Board of Education, which would be a change in school code, effectively a change in legislation. That can be done quickly. I think we've all, especially school board members, know that legislation can be passed really fast. But I think that's going to be a process. So it's a really good point. I think parents all need to know that students being required to get the COVID vaccination is still a far way off. It's got to go through several steps to get there. And at that point, there will still be exemptions for parents when the requirement is in place if they don't want their child to be vaccinated. So a lot of steps to get there, and even in the end, there's going to be a way to get an exemption or a waiver.
So I would say for all those reasons, we shouldn't even think about it. We shouldn't even talk about it. It's a red herring issue. It just clouds the frontier for everybody. Let's just take that student vaccination idea off the table and get on with other plans, because it's just fogging up the future picture. And it really is so remote at this point that it's not worth considering. So, we probably shouldn't waste any more breath on it, quite literally. A couple other things, I would like to find out from some of these other school districts that are maybe using 3 feet as their spacing guideline for safe distancing, what their experiences have been, and what experience of COVID and COVID spread among student populations where they're doing that. The other thing is, perhaps the students are spaced 3 feet apart, but the teachers can continue to be 6 feet from the students, or even further if we needed to do that as an accommodation. So, you know, I think we need to bifurcate that issue a little bit. And then I really think we need to move somehow to either start getting every Friday into the rotation like we did for our first hybrid model, or lengthening the school day, trying to get as much time out of what the system will allow as we currently are set up. We have to start taking some positive steps forward now. We've taken some baby steps, now it's time to take some bigger steps. And then the other thing is I'm just curious as to how long it's going to take us to even put together you know, at least a rudimentary or a plan, a skeletal plan that we can start to talk about, so we really can start building for the future, so that as that comes, we're more prepared for that than we were back when, you know, COVID hit and nobody knew what was going on. You know, now we have some experience. We know a little bit about how to deal with some of these issues. We can get better traction on this, and we could start to plan so that as the situations unfold, we have those plans out there. And I think we owe it to all our stakeholders to be able to put together a plan and show them, even if it's a plan that works in steps, or if it's a plan that you know, it's got to be modified from time to time because of a curveball that we get thrown, because, you know, that happens. But we need to have that. We really need, I mean, people are just disoriented because they don't know what direction we're going in. And until we actually kind of start to pick a path for ourselves and for the district, they're going to remain disoriented, and they're going to be frustrated, and rightly so. You know, we're all frustrated by it, but I think we have to come to grips with it. We keep, you know, I think the criticism that I keep hearing, and I think it's probably valid, is we keep juggling the balls because they keep changing, but we really need to start to look through some of these issues and say, okay, well, maybe that's a side issue, maybe that's a side issue, but what do we do in terms of putting together some kind of a plan to at least get started? And, you know, when things do get better, we want to certainly have a plan in place to take advantage of that.
I think that's a good point, and, you know, I think in our current situation, there's only a couple of options really, but adding some detail to that, developing those plans and putting it into some steps, I think is a good idea. And I'll work with the staff to do that.
I concur with the vaccination of the students piece. I think that's a non-starter at this point. I like the ideas of the surveys as well, because that I think is important. But it's not just the community that we need to survey. I think we need another teacher survey as well, so that we understand where they're at on some things. And I think there's another question that could be accessed in there as well, relative to our two options, Fridays or a longer day, because both of them will impact how they are teaching. And there's challenges with both, lunches, transportation, off days. I think I'm leaning towards a longer day, because I think that might have less impact on the instructional piece and more consistency, so they can cover more ground, have more contact that way than the Fridays, because I know the Fridays are catch-up days, dealing with the remote learners that are fully remote by choice, and that's kind of like planning periods that they normally would have during a normal year. They may say differently, that's why I think the survey is important, but I think that should help us determine which one of those steps we do first, which needs to, you know, turn around quickly, so we have that data and can build that into the plan prior to our next board meeting. And I think we should also be publishing a skeletal plan on a full return for the fall. on the assumption that, yes, at minimum, we have a full return in the fall, so that people can at least have an idea what it looks like, even if it has to change for unforeseen reasons. What is it going to look like, and how are we going to implement, and what that time frame and requirements are going to be? And I think the survey to the parents should also include that waiver question. If we decide to go with the World Health Organization versus the local health department and the CDC and say 3 feet, will you sign a waiver to protect the district so that we can move forward and create a win-win situation? So.
Well, and hopefully if we and other districts start publishing those sorts of skeletal plans and say, here's what we need to do to be back to normal in the fall, and every district is saying we need a social distancing distance that's 3 or 4 feet, that will start to drive more action from the health departments to say, look, now we got thousands of school districts all saying we need to tell them either, no, you can't do that, or, all right, yeah, I guess we can relax it a bit. So that part, we can be part of the solution by being more vocal about the problem.
Right.
But I also wouldn't rule out figuring out the biggest or the craziest solutions to some of these problems as well, and making that part of the survey. And if that is, you know what, transportation is the thing that every one of these problems comes down to, parents, you know, how many would, if you're currently taking advantage of transportation, could find another opportunity, either with a neighbor or some other way, if it's going to get you back to, or help the district get back to in-person learning. I mean, we have to start lobbing some of those questions out there and getting participation. I know other districts at the beginning of the year were saying, okay, well, if enough people go remote, we can do in person, and left it up to the community to make the decision that way. We need to start giving them some of our problems and saying, here's what we can't do anything about, so what are you going to do about it that's going to help us? And hope for the best.
Well, and again, I think transportation becomes a problem when you have the model where you have a half a day. And
That's why I think the full
so
day-
that's why I'm thinking, right, we develop a plan that's not modeled on that kind of a system, so that we can plan out that transportation in a much more efficient manner, so that we don't have to worry about it as a problem.
Correct. I agree.
One of the challenges with transportation is that we're required to provide it. So,
Right.
you know, getting language in a waiver is something we'll have to work with our attorneys on. My experience is that if you word it the right way, you can get a waiver, but that's a little bit different. It's required to provide that.
Well, we have the buses. It's the drivers that we need, according to what you were saying. And I think if we start to develop a plan where it's going to look like bus drivers are working every day, that's probably going to be much more attractive to people who want to drive buses to come back to work.
Bus drivers
I
are
know
bus-
it's not just solely, the availability of work. There's other issues, but I think a steady schedule would certainly have a positive impact on the number of people that would want to do the job.
Or alternatively, staying on top of whatever legislation is going through, and can those federal funds be used to outsource some driving? Can we hire a first student to come in and bus a portion of the population, to supplement our own transportation?
Yeah, I think there's state statutes against that.
Okay.
We'll dig into it. Any other questions for me in respect with a return to learning?
No, I think we gave you
Plenty to do.
a truckload there.
I got a good list, but a lot of things we've already talked about, and the survey, things like that, we'll put together and start getting that information, and ultimately, we can present that to the board and ask for some direction in terms of what you're comfortable doing. Okay, that takes us to future focused. This is the first meeting of the month, and as luck would have it, the topic that I chose to talk about tonight was social and emotional wellness. So I got some points here to talk about. I did pick the brain of some of our counselors in the district. Some of this is information that I think has been well known, and some additional information that I gleaned from those conversations. One of the things that educators have always done is monitor students' social and emotional wellness, their mental health. We continue to do that today. We know that students learn best when they feel safe, when they feel supported, when they feel valued. That staff like having them in the building and working with them. Mental health needs were on the rise before the pandemic, and I think that you guys know that it's not just Sycamore, it's not just one school district, it's across the state, it's across the country. And we were seeing issues in terms of mental health in students that were much younger than we'd ever seen before prior to COVID. So mental health has been an increasing issue, and COVID has just made that very difficult on top of all that. We don't want to lose sight that social emotional wellness of the staff is critical as well. So staff work best when they feel safe and they feel supported and they are grounded. So that's something that we need to keep in mind too. Really glad that a lot of organizations have offered social emotional support to our staff, professional development for staff, from the School Board Association to the Illinois IASA, the Superintendent Association. The ROE has provided some mental health and social emotional professional development for staff. We've got another round of that starting. They've done a great job with that. So, we recognize that that's an issue, and we're providing support for that. And actually, the focus of our Institute Day this Friday for staff is social emotional wellness. So there are some academic offerings that will be available too, but the primary focus is on social emotional wellness of our staff. So what challenges lie ahead? I think one of the parents mentioned this tonight, and this came up in a conversation that I had with counselors this week. Anxiety was the top issue identified by students themselves in a survey that was taken by the students involved in Youth Engaged in Philanthropy organization here in our community. Students themselves recognize that anxiety was the top issue that students are dealing with these days. Home has become a shelter. It's also become what I would refer to as a fortress, as opposed to a place where you just go to be safe. Now the gate is up, you've kind of locked yourself in the house, and for some students and some adults as well, there's this sense of, I don't want to leave the house anymore. I'm comfortable here, and there's some anxiety, but just about going out into the world, into the workplace, into school. So one of the things that we'll need to do is to continue to reinforce that returning to school and socializing is positive, it's helpful. One of the challenges that we're going to have to face is how do we build those skills back up on our students as they return to school. A lot of our students, when I'm in the hallways in the schools, they're excited to be back. They're excited to be around their peers for the most part. However, after talking with counselors, I know that there are students who are in our buildings and still struggling to be there every day, and we've had some students that were hybrid and returned to school in person and then opted to go back to remote because they're not comfortable being back in school. That's something that we're going to have to face, and one of the challenges of a full return is probably a larger group of students than we're used to not wanting to come back to school. And I could tell you stories about students prior to the pandemic who just did not want to get out of the car or get out of the bus to go into school in the morning. So that group's probably going to be a little bit bigger. One of the other issues that was brought up earlier that I completely agree with is that the excessive screen time has been an issue. And we may be at a point, this was a part of the conversation I had earlier this week, we may be at a point where as adults we're kind of becoming desensitized to that because it's been so long and our students have been on screens for so long that we may be starting to lose track of that a little bit. I've got an app on my phone, on my iPhone for screen time. I can monitor all the screen time of everybody in my family. Probably don't monitor that as much as I used to because I know it's inevitable right now. Not only because of the remote learning that's going on, but just the fact that we can't go out and do things the way that we're used to doing. So that's going to be an issue. Some students are doing better academically at home. I've heard several stories, I've received emails throughout the school year from parents who like having the option for their student to stay remote because they're doing better at home academically than they did when they were in school. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe they were being bullied or picked on by other students and they're not putting up with that when they're at home. They just feel safer there. The challenge is that we don't want them to stay there. And counselors have done a phenomenal job. Staff has done a phenomenal job. It's not just counselors, it's teachers and paraprofessionals as well, who are reaching out to those students and trying to engage with those students and encouraging them to come back. There are some other issues, whether it's just not feeling safe with the virus out there coming back to school. And part of me believes as an educator that as we move forward, some degree of remote learning is something that we're going to have to wrestle with. You know, there will be families that still want to do that. What are the qualifications to do that? What's the rationale or the justification for doing that? And if they do that, when they're not engaging, when they've opted to go remote, this is a challenge that was brought up by some of the counselors this week. If they choose to do that, but they're not engaging when they're remote learning, then what do we do? You know, if a student was enrolled in school and just wasn't coming to school, at a certain point, we would consider withdrawing them or have withdrawn them because they've not been engaged at school. We don't have that kind of policy in place or that procedure or guideline in place. So that's one of the other things that we're going to have to wrestle with is if that becomes more common than it was prior to the pandemic, what's the threshold for that? How do we make those decisions? And what happens when students opt for remote and aren't engaged in what's going on at school? So some policy changes as well that we're going to have to consider. On the last bullet point, remote instruction isn't sustainable in the long term. Teachers are doing a phenomenal job with the parallel hybrid model. It is not easy, and Mr. Wesley touched on that early. It's not easy. They've done a phenomenal job with it. That is not sustainable. So as we think about students who are wanting to stay home, what does that look like? How do we support that? It's not sustainable from an instructional standpoint, and really it isn't good on a large scale for the long-term benefit of the students and the staff. So I could probably talk for another hour or two about social-emotional well-being for both students and staff. It's one of the things I wanted to make sure was on the board's radar as we continue to move forward and think about how we're going to get students back in the classroom instructionally and academically. But what are the other issues that again have been raised here tonight, have been raised here before? How are we going to support students and our staff as we continue to move forward with their social-emotional needs? What does the future hold? Supporting students through that transition, so making sure that that's part of the plan. How are we going to help students transition back? How are we going to help them with those skills and make them feel welcome? Staff have done a great job of doing that already, but we'll need to continue to do that. We need to continue to take a critical look at our instructional model for the future, for the long term. Again, what we're doing now isn't sustainable in the long term, but what have we learned during the pandemic that we can apply to the future? And how can we do things a little bit differently that are still going to give students what they need
having those discussions, and I would assume as that is being built, we're still trying to imagine how we leverage the technology and our experience in remote learning in what we can do, moving forward. So do you anticipate, or have those discussions been had, as that starts to unfold, leveraging that stronger? I would assume, maybe just an assumption on my end, but you kind of looked in just the workplace or the school, like if you came to work and you came to school and you're about keeled over dead, it was like, oh no, he's just soldiering through, where that might not be encouraged anymore in the years moving forward, where, okay, if I've got to be home for 2 days because I'm a little sick, I can still get some work done. I can still be productive in that. So do you anticipate that moving forward as we start looking for it? But that snow days, I know, is another, those people on both sides of that fence of we want our snow days if we have them, but all of those type of options, I guess.
Yeah, really good points, and I think we're going to need to be open to all ideas. From a student perspective, it's the ability to support students who are going to be out for a couple of weeks at a time.
Sure.
But one of the other things, and you touched on this, is for staff, if they can work remotely from home right now, when they have to be out, when they're quarantined, but maybe they weren't necessarily positive or have symptoms, but they still feel pretty good, but they have to be home. Well, they can work from home right now, so they're not having to take sick leave. They can still interact with students. Substitute teachers do a phenomenal job, but there's no really good substitute for the classroom teacher. So if they have that ability, that's going to help staff as well. At least it's going to be an option for them moving forward. And I think as we continue to have those conversations over time, there will continue to be benefits to that are going to pop up, as well as some challenges that we're going to have to work through. But I think one of the advantages is that we've used technology so creatively, and we have the hardware now to do things much differently than we did before. Maybe the future doesn't look, maybe a year or two doesn't look the way it does right now, but I think with a lot of the technology, we can use it differently, or maybe we look at other technology replacing what we've got in the longer term with something that we're going to be able to use more effectively once the pandemic is behind us. So, I think we're just going to need to be open to all options as we have those conversations.
I think that over the years, as we developed our strategic design, that we have had a lot of discussions about remote learning and about how that would fit in, and we've always kind of played with that around the edges and really not had to dive in, and now we're in it. We had to dive in, but now I think there are going to be certain experiences that we take out of this that we're going to be able to build on, and I think that there's definitely a place for remote learning. And when you think about it, it's very similar to what's going on in the workplace now anyway. Our old model of education was based on an assembly line where you kind of advanced along the line, and you learned a skill here, you moved up to the next job, you moved up to the next job, and that's the way our whole educational system was. But now we're different. The world has evolved, and the tools that we need to impart to our students have to change as well, so that they can continue to succeed in their world. So I really think there's going to be a place for virtual learning, for remote learning. In one respect, it's going to allow us to really broaden the curriculum, so that if somebody has an interest somewhere that we don't have a specialty in, they can still pursue that. But in another way, I think it's going to allow people to learn in areas where they have a passion, and the way I see it happening is you just don't learn remotely on your own, but you are in a group of other students with similar passions and similar interests, and you come together. You learn outside of this building maybe, but then you come together to synthesize what you learn, to learn how to interact with other people, to learn how to debate with them, to learn how to process with them, and to learn both social skills as well as intellectual skills. So, I mean, I really see a lot of potential for, virtual learning and remote learning that's more integrated into the system. And I think there are a lot of ways to do that. And I think we've really, during the strategic design process, talked a lot about that. So this may be the impetus that we really needed to fully implement that strategic design that we really had in mind, even when we didn't really have a full vision of what that would look like.
I totally agree.
So, on the social emotional learning part, I and others were saying this back when we were having board meetings virtually, that this was going to be the fallout of all this.
Yep.
Everyone could see that coming. And I think as we talked about a return to learning plan, full time, whether that's the fourth quarter or summer school or the fall, or perhaps all of those, that I know we have, guidance counselors on staff and social workers on staff, and psychologists and things, but the more I've thought about it, and I've been thinking about it since last summer, how I was hoping it would be much sooner than it is, but at some point when we do go back, how does that transition look? And from the social emotional standpoint, and I'm wondering if the fact that we have staff there doesn't do it for me, in the sense that it's like it was. This is going to be different. There's been significant impacts on students and staff. I'm thinking that part of that return to learning plan should include a component that is, for lack of a better term, a social and emotional response team that takes advantage of our current staff, and perhaps we need to budget for some additional staff for that, even if they're only part-time or whatever we determine, that are targeted towards K-5, middle school, high school, and addressing more specific issues than the typical issues that we might have seen. I think that should be part of our plan going forward, and we should, one, budget for it, and two, lay that out, again, whether it's in the fall or fourth quarter, or it gets tested out in a summer school setting. Because I think there's a lot more impact to this than people have recognized up to this point.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's always been a crisis team in the school district. I don't know, Craig, what you call it now, made up of a lot of different people, and I'm sure that's what you're talking about.
But in a bigger
scale, I'm sure that particular team, I don't even know who's on it anymore, but could maybe address what Steve is talking about. But I know there's already something in place to
There's a
deal
framework to build from, yeah.
with situations. Not that anyone expected it to be this, but I'm sure that you have a group already. You just have to work with them.
Yeah. Build it, and target it.
Any other questions or comments about social emotional learning? Okay. The last part of the superintendent's report is one slide, policy revisions. I'd like to recommend that the board adopt the most recent round of policy revisions as presented.
Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second? Motion and a second. Roll call?
Jacobson?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Wren?
Yes.
Shiloh?
Yes.
Davy?
Yes.
Donovan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Assistant Superintendent for Business Services report.
I just want to give the board an update on the budget process for fiscal year '22. So we met with our principals and our program managers last week, met with them and went over their budgets. And with the creation of our finance subcommittee, I have a meeting with Eric and Chris in the upcoming weeks. And so the plan for that and recommendation is to really dive deep into the budget with that finance subcommittee. And then also with that, I would propose putting together a budget report. This is something that I wanted to do over the last couple of years. And so working with that finance subcommittee to put this report together, think of it kind of like our CAFR, but for the budget. Probably not 150 pages, but.
Darn.
200? It might end up being that long, but, so these are just kind of some of the sections that we would look at doing. There'd obviously be, the summary put together in the beginning, and then just really focusing on those financial sections of all the operating funds, just the funds in general, breaking it out by object code, function code. So kind of just getting some more information out there when we talk about transparency. And then another piece of that would be it broken out by departments, which is what the board has been used to, having those departments come and make those presentations. So it would be in the form of this budget report now going forward. And then also part of that would be our staffing. So Nick and Steve and I are going to be sitting down in the next couple of weeks to go over all those staffing requests that we've received. And again, when I meet with our finance subcommittee, then I would have recommendations for that and how that fits into our budget moving forward. And then also we'd be able to have, some other sections in this budget report with all the reporting that we're able to get through our Forecast 5 partnership. So that's my recommendation for that. If the board has any questions or comments.
Does it include a glossary?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which leads to my next question. Who's the intended audience for this report?
So we would work on that together and bring that to the board, probably sometime early this summer. And then that would be published and made available for our community.
So the idea is that anybody from the community could look at this and get a better understanding of our budget as opposed to looking at that ISB approved Excel mess.
Yep.
Do you have any examples of other districts doing something similar? Will we be able to see those during the finance subcommittee meeting just to get an idea of what the final?
So what you're proposing is something that's vastly different than what we've been doing over the last several years.
It is a different approach.
So it's something that I know when I first heard about the idea that I thought that the whole board should hear and make a determination as to whether or not we really want to go in that direction or not. It's something that we've always done as a committee of the whole, but this may be much more efficient and it may serve the stakeholders in a much better way if ultimately they have access to a document that allows them to see kind of into what the budget really stands for. So, I don't know if anybody thinks it's a good idea or a bad idea, but now's the time to.
So when I heard it, I was hesitant about not having the whole board hear it.
Right.
Because I liked that budget process and being a part of it, hearing the presentations. I didn't mind the extra 4, then 3, then 2 meetings that it's evolved over the years. I quite frankly really liked the way it was many years ago when we put it up on the board and you had to rate a number and you knew where people stood on what they supported and what they didn't. We haven't really been in a position financially to make choices like that in many years with no surpluses, so or significant surpluses. So I'm still a little hesitant about not being the board as a whole, not being a part of it. I like the outcome. I like the report idea. I like the idea of the public being able to see a little deeper view into the budget and everything. I'm just a little hesitant of not having the whole board participate in it. And it's not that I don't trust the finance committee. It's just I enjoy being part of the discussion myself, just to have a better understanding of it. So maybe there's a way in between that if we want to go that direction, that one of our retreats or one specific meeting, at least we get a deeper summary of not all the presentations, but deeper review of where we're at from the finance committee and the quote. Maybe that's a compromise.
I guess I wasn't aware. I agree completely with you, and I didn't realize that was completely disappearing. I thought the finance subcommittee was more just for Chris and I to take those, what could turn into a 3-4 hour discussion about some of these nitpicky things and kind of have that offline, but still have the
I'm okay with that.
overview.
I want to still be part of the budget process, I guess, is my point as a board.
And I would agree in this position or in that position, I feel the same way, so I would support
Other comments about that, about changing the
Frankly,
process?
I thought this was a great idea because we have a finance committee that you specifically recommended. It's not that I didn't enjoy listening to the principals discuss it, but I kind of felt like the budget was already decided with you and the superintendent, and we were just kind of, okay, that's okay, you know, and to make the principals come out again and go through this whole thing and the technology people when it's already been presented to you. I mean, it's not that I didn't appreciate it, but this to me seems a little more streamlined and more beneficial to everybody that you're doing it because that's your job and your committee. And so to me, this is a really good plan.
I'm certainly open to it, but I do like your suggestion, Steve. I think we still should have a session. You know, maybe it's a meeting, maybe it's a workshop, but you know, one session where we kind of go through it in some detail, albeit after it's been digested by the committee. So.
Yeah, and I think that would be the outcome of this recording.
Yeah, just, you know, to walk us through.
Yeah,
I'd be okay with that.
I think it's worth a try, and we'll see how it goes.
Sounds good.
I was gonna say, the sooner we hold that, the more time you've got to say, no, we need more information for us to schedule more talks.
That's true. No,
there's gonna be a
absolutely.
transition period here as we try something different.
That's absolutely true.
Yep, absolutely.
Anything else?
That's it.
Open discussion and future agenda items?
Well, because we just talked about this, I think it would be a kind of a nice idea if Steve gets together with this crisis team, if maybe down the road, maybe May or sometime like that, when things have gotten back into some sort of whatever normal is, we get kind of a presentation of how that's working, how people are affected by it, who's being helped, just to give us an idea. Maybe it would have to wait till the beginning of the school year, I'm not sure. But, you know, just so we know that, because Steve was talking about it, that it actually is, this Steve, is actually, you know, doing what it's supposed to be doing with this pandemic. Just a thought.
Yeah. And we can add that to future agenda items. Anything else? Open discussion, questions?
I would just love for us to continue to expand, and you mentioned this earlier, on the communication, the transparency standpoint. We cover a lot of material here that not the entire community sees, and I'm already seeing posts online where people have misinterpreted things I think that we've discussed, because they posted before they saw the whole conversation. What I would like to see more, and I don't know if that's a page on the website that's kind of talking about these frequently asked questions that come up, or if it's a weekly newsletter, just as, you know, here were things that the administration discussed and talked to IDPH and the DeKalb County Health, and, you know, just something to kind of keep people in the loop so that they know there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes. Like, it's easy to come to a meeting every 2 weeks and think nothing's happened in 2 weeks when, like you said, people are involved in these discussions and changes on a daily basis. So I would just encourage more, finding a way to get more information out to the community. I love the new website, but I know we've lost some things in the process. We don't have anything about the reopening plan up there at all right now. I know a lot of districts have something, although a lot of them haven't updated it since the fall.
Right.
But just continuing to push information whatever way we can.
I like the idea of an FAQ kind of page. You know, when you do a newsletter, you got to kind of find the right newsletter to find the answer. But if you do an FAQ kind of page, you can list it. You can identify it by topic or date or whatever. But it's all on one page, and people can kind of sift through it. So I'll work with David to see if we can develop something like that on the new website.
I know it's been difficult this year, and I think it's compounded by the fact that we're all working remotely, so the amount of emails we receive on a daily basis is probably tripled. I'm making up that statistic because that's how statistics work. But there's a lot of people who ask questions, and you'll see the responses. Oh, well, the principal sent that out in his weekly newsletter. Didn't you get that? And I think there's no way for people, unless I'm mistaken, to go back and find those things. It'd be nice if that sort of stuff that's being pushed also had a place on the website. Here's the principal's newsletter for this week. Just so that at least when you're trying to send somebody to a resource, you can say, well, you know, like the hybrid schedules were another one. Every school kind of has its own hybrid schedule. And if you're not part of that school or miss something, you're left wondering what time. And I ask my wife every morning, what time am I supposed to pick up my kid? Because each school, they're all different times, and I'm easily, you know, lost in the shuffle. So the more of that we can.
Didn't we used to get like a weekly thing from the principal?
Well, I do, but now on the board I get 7 of them, and
I will say that all the schools are doing a weekly newsletter.
Yep.
The format is very similar.
It
The
is.
information varies by school. And to the principal's job or credit, it's excellent.
It is. I would
If
just
you've
like
got-
a place where if I delete the email, I can
Yeah.
still get back. to
Well,
see.
and you're right, if you've got kids in multiple schools, I think one of the parents mentioned that, you know, kids in elementary, middle school, and high school, it's easy to get them mixed up, you know. I get all 7 of them too, and it's great information, but they can get lost fast, so. But the newsletters are great, so kudos to the principals for.
Definitely want to keep those coming and just be nice to have. Especially the things that everyone looks to frequently. Those schedules on a daily basis, I think is still something that people are having issues with, or especially as we continue to make changes, are going to want a place they can go to see what is the schedule for my A kid at Southeast or middle school. Or,
I did want to say, I don't know if it came out today. I found it in my email today, but there was a communication about the meeting tonight and what was on the agenda, and I really, really, really loved it, and I appreciated it. And I know I'm going to make it sound so simple, but if that even could be updated with what was decided in those agenda items, or just a sentence or two about what happened at this meeting to provide follow-up to that communication. That communication was a really great start, and I know in years past, long before COVID and before we were live streaming, David, you attended our meetings and you wrote a bit of a recap, I guess, of that meeting. So if that's something, even if it was a student-driven something that could come back and be part of the website, that would be great.
I agree. I really enjoyed the content of those. Missed that.
Anything else for open discussion, future agenda items, questions? Is there a motion to go into executive session for the consideration of matters related to the appointment, employment, or dismissal of personnel, negotiations, and imminent litigation?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Jones.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Brent.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Davy.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Donbeck.
Yes.
Motion carried.
We'll recess for executive session and then return for our final vote. Hey, got a score on that?
It was 1-1 at the start of the third. 1-0 after the first, tied after the second, still 1-1 going into the third.
Need my 3 pickups.
I thought we were supposed to be 6.
All right, we're back in regular session. Is there a motion to approve the personnel report as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Bryn?
Yes.
Shiloh?
Yes.
Davy?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Dombeck?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Out into the 10 below.
We'll be back to Davy Jones again?